Hey everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. You know, every time I hear somebody say that Trump wants to designate Antifa as a terrorist organization, I stop and think, wait a minute, what exactly does that even mean in America's legal system? Because on the surface, it sounds tough, right? It sounds like a president drawing a hard line against chaos in the streets, against mobs dressed in black smashing windows, setting cars on fire, and throwing bricks at police. But when you dig into it, and I really want us to dig into it today, the whole idea runs into a brick wall called the US Constitution. And that's what I want to talk about in this deep dive. Trump's statement, Antifa's history, the legal and political mess around domestic extremism, and why, honestly, both the left and the right have been struggling with the same problem for decades. So let's start by revisiting the scene of the Charlie Kirk assassination attempt. Recently, Trump was standing in front of the press, talking about that shocking incident where someone actually attempted an assassination. Yeah, a political assassination attempt in America, which is wild when you stop and think about it. In his response, he circled back to something he's been saying since 2020, that Antifa should be treated as terrorists. Now, you can roll your eyes at Trump or you can nod along, depending on your politics. But either way, it's worth asking, does he even have the power to do that? And what would it mean if he did? Before we get to the legal weeds, let's rewind a little and talk about Antifa itself. Because this group, or maybe I should say this movement, since it's not a traditional group with a headquarters and a membership list, has been around for a while. The name comes from anti-fascist. Sounds noble, right? Who's going to stand up and say, oh yeah, I'm pro-fascist? Nobody. But the way Antifa operates, especially in the United States since about 2016, has turned them into one of the most controversial players on the political stage. Think back to Berkeley in 2017. There was supposed to be a speech, a conservative speaker on campus, and Antifa showed up. They weren't there to protest peacefully. They came with helmets, shields, fireworks, Molotov cocktails, bats, you name it. They smashed windows, set fires, and physically attacked people trying to get into the event. That was one of the first big national headlines where Americans who hadn't heard the name Antifa before suddenly saw them in action. Fast forward to 2020. We all remember that summer. George Floyd's death, massive protests across the country, and in some cities, things spiraled out of control. Minneapolis burned. Portland turned into a nightly battleground. You had clashes between protesters and police, federal courthouses under siege, entire blocks taken over. And yes, Antifa was right there in the middle of it. Not the only ones, let's be clear, but definitely playing a role in escalating violence. They weren't the kids holding signs and chanting. They were the ones breaking through police lines, torching businesses, and getting into fistfights. So if you're Trump, or really if you're any Republican watching that chaos on TV, it makes total sense that you'd say, enough is enough. These guys aren't just protesters, they're domestic terrorists. And if Al-Qaeda or ISIS did this, we'd call it terrorism, right? So why not call Antifa the same thing? That's the logic. But here's the problem. In America, terrorism is a legal category. And the way our laws are written, only foreign groups can be formally designated as terrorist organizations. The Secretary of State can put Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, ISIS on that list. Once they're on it, boom, the government has all sorts of powers to go after them, freeze their assets, cut off their funding, arrest people for material support. That's how the war on terror has worked since 9/11. But there is no mechanism, none, for declaring a domestic group a terrorist organization. Not Antifa, not the Ku Klux Klan, not a neo-Nazi militia, not even a violent street gang. You can't just say, these guys are terrorists now. The law doesn't allow it. Why? Because of the Constitution. And here's where things get tricky. The First Amendment protects speech and association. That means you can say almost anything, join almost any group, believe in almost any ideology, and the government can't punish you for it. Even if you're a communist, a fascist, a white supremacist, or an anarchist, your beliefs are protected. What's not protected? Violence. If you commit arson, assault, or murder, that's a crime, and the government can and should arrest you for it. But the government can't say, just belonging to Antifa or just calling yourself Antifa makes you a criminal. That would be unconstitutional. So when Trump says Antifa is a terrorist group, it's more of a political statement than a legal one. It fires up his base. It makes headlines. But in practice, it doesn't change how law enforcement can deal with them. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, can't Congress just pass a law to create a domestic terrorist designation? And yeah, people have floated that idea for years. After Oklahoma City in 1995, after 9/11, after January 6th, lawmakers on both sides have said maybe we need new laws. But every time it comes up, civil liberties groups raise the alarm. Because think about it. If the government can label a domestic group as terrorists, what's to stop them from going after political opponents? A Republican president might go after Antifa. A Democratic president might go after right-wing militias. Where does it stop? Suddenly, you're criminalizing ideology, not action. And that's a very dangerous road in a democracy. So instead, what usually happens is this. Law enforcement uses existing laws. They charge rioters with arson, assault, vandalism, weapons violations. They use conspiracy charges when groups plan violence together. And in some cases, they pull out RICO laws, the same ones used against the mafia, to go after organized networks. That's probably the most realistic path when it comes to something like Antifa, not declaring them terrorists, but treating them like a criminal enterprise if there's evidence of coordination. And let me tell you, the funding question is a big one, because groups like Antifa don't exist in a vacuum. They need money for bail funds, legal defense, transportation, equipment, propaganda. Where does that come from? Some of it is grassroots donations, sure. Some of it flows through nonprofit organizations. And yes, sometimes there are wealthy donors who sympathize with the cause. This is where you'll hear conservatives bring up names like George Soros. Now, Soros is like a boogeyman on the right, blamed for everything from riots to immigration to progressive prosecutors. Is every claim about him true? No. But is there a real network of funding that supports left-wing activism? Absolutely. Just like there's a real network of conservative donors funding right-wing activism. Money makes the world go round, and politics is no exception. So one strategy Trump hinted at and others have talked about is follow the money. If you can't outlaw Antifa as a terrorist group, maybe you can cut off their funding. Maybe you can use financial crimes, tax laws, or RICO statutes to go after the organizations and people bankrolling the violence. That's a strategy that has worked in other contexts, like with gangs and even international terrorism. But again, let's be balanced here. It's not just the left. The far right has its violent factions too. Remember January 6th? That wasn't Antifa storming the Capitol. That was Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, and other pro-Trump groups. They plotted, they broke in, they attacked police officers, and they tried to disrupt the certification of an election. To a lot of Americans, that looked like domestic terrorism, plain and simple. And guess what? Prosecutors charged many of them with seditious conspiracy, some of the heaviest charges in the book. But even then, nobody officially labeled them terrorists. Because again, our system just doesn't work that way. So here's where we land. America has a real problem with political violence on both extremes. Antifa on the left, Proud Boys and militias on the right. And yet, we don't have a clean legal tool for calling any of them terrorists. That frustrates people. It frustrates Trump supporters. It frustrates Democrats too. when they look at right-wing extremism. But maybe, in a weird way, that frustration is a good thing. Because the minute we let the government start labeling domestic groups as terrorists, we risk handing them too much power. Think about history. In the 1950s, during the Red Scare, the government basically treated communists as enemies of the state. People were blacklisted, careers destroyed, lives ruined, not for committing crimes, but for their political beliefs. Do we really want to go back there? Probably not. So maybe the smarter approach is to do what we already do. Focus on actions, not labels. Arrest people who commit crimes. Investigate networks that fund or coordinate violence. Use RICO laws where applicable. And, most importantly, address the root causes, the polarization, the anger, the social conditions that give rise to these movements in the first place. Now, I know some of you are thinking, that sounds too soft. That sounds like letting them off the hook. But I'd argue it's actually the opposite. Because when you charge someone with arson or conspiracy, you can put them in prison for years. When you take down a funding network, you cripple their ability to operate. Those are real consequences. Meanwhile, just slapping a terrorist label on them without the law to back it up does nothing. It's symbolic. It's political theater. And look, this isn't just about Antifa or Trump. This is about the bigger picture of how America deals with extremism at home. We're a country that values free speech, even when it's ugly. We let Nazis march in Skokie, Illinois. We let communists publish newspapers. We let anarchists hand out flyers. Why? Because the alternative is worse. The alternative is letting the government decide which ideas are allowed and which aren't. And once you go down that road, you don't really have a free society anymore. So when I hear Trump talk about Antifa as terrorists, I get why he says it. I get the frustration. I get the anger. But I also know the reality. Unless Congress rewrites the laws, and that's unlikely, it's not going to happen. And maybe, just maybe, that's for the best. At the end of the day, political violence is political violence, no matter where it comes from. We should condemn it, prosecute it, and stop it. But we should also protect the freedoms that make this country what it is. And striking that balance between security and liberty, between order and freedom, that's the real challenge. And that's where I'll leave it for today. If you stuck with me through this whole breakdown, thank you. I know it's complicated. I know it's messy. But it's important. Because this isn't just about Antifa or Trump or Democrats or Republicans. It's about what kind of country we want to live in. One where the government has the power to silence domestic groups it doesn't like. Or one where the government sticks to punishing actions, not beliefs. That's the debate. And it's not going away anytime soon. See you next time.